Welcome back to another episode of Tied Together, brought to you by Coheasus. I'm Kaustav Bhattacharya, Chief Technology Officer at Coheasus, and today I have the immense pleasure of having our CEO and founder, Rich Bundock, on the show. As a tech entrepreneur, Rich has seen the good, bad, and ugly of building digital services. So in today's episode, we both dissect the many examples of great and bad digital experiences and shed some light on how businesses can deliver compelling solutions that keep customers engaged. So, hi, Rich. How you doing?
I'm good. That was fun.
Yeah, indeed. It's always fun. Every day is fun here at Coheasus. So we are here today to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of customer experiences. And I know in the years of experience that you've had in the industry, you've come across some pretty good examples and designed some pretty good examples of customer experiences yourself, as well as advised customers on improving what was pretty bad to start off with and turning them into fantastic customer experiences. So I'd love to talk to you about that.
So I'd like to go back to the beginning, and I guess the beginning for me is when did I become aware of experiences? I know we're sort of talking about customer experiences, but any kind of experience with tech. And I think it was when I first started out on my journey to where I am now. My dad brought a computer and I was infatuated with it, fascinated. I couldn't do anything else apart from use it. And I got into programming it. As I started to do that, I became aware of this term, user friendliness. And that's what it was called back in the day. You used to have this idea that the software that you were writing or building, the technology that you were building, had to work not just in terms of functionality, but it had to be easy to use. You know, that term then tended to morph over time, and it's morphed into experience. An experience about the way that everybody uses digital technology and how easy it is to use, how much friction there is.
You're right. It was about the user experience in the old days, but now I suppose experience has expanded into so many different areas, right? It's not just about the interface and the interaction, but it's about the language, it's about the tone of voice, it's about the onboarding, it's about so many other different aspects of the experience that are all brought together.
It is. It's definitely changed a lot over the years. Nowadays, people have a higher expectation. The other side of it is that also a lot of the tools or the things that you could do years ago, you can go back in the archives. So, and maybe I'm showing my age a little bit, but I quite like having a little look at some of the old stuff on YouTube that's up there. And I saw one the other day, which was all about email. This guy, and it was 1980, something around 1981, something like that. This guy is basically sending an email to the TV studio. Him and his wife, they're putting an email together, sending it to the TV studio. The TV studio is receiving it. This is all on Prestel, which is a very old dial-up network before the main internet.
I remember it well.
Functionally, it's the same as email now. Probably a little bit better because there wasn't that many users of email, so you didn't get any spam. But functionally, it's the same thing. You can achieve the same thing that you can now. However, the experience of doing it, it was far harder to do. You had to have an acoustic coupler, so you had to phone up Presto, you had to dial the numbers, and then you had to take the acoustic coupler, you had to put it on a hardware piece, and then you had to use some weird incantations on the keyboard to actually get up the email interface, and then you type the note, and then you use more weird incantations to actually send it and do formatting. Those things have gone away. Those weird incantations now generally have gone away, but the functionality is still there. So experience is really, for me, the way that I look at it is it enables people to do the things that everyone can do, but enables them to do them without thinking. In today's modern world, we've got a lot more information to deal with than we ever had. We've got a lot more services and things that we take part in. Back in the day, you used to have 4 TV channels, or you used to have a Sky subscription. Let's not go back too far. You used to have just one single subscription. Now you've got a Netflix subscription, a Prime subscription. You've got a YouTube subscription. You've got all these different subscriptions that you then have to manage. Yeah. Although the point I'm trying to get to here is a bit of a weird one. You might enjoy this, and we might go down that route. We might not. Yeah. But the point I'm trying to make here is because things are getting easier to use, there's more things. And it's almost as if we've got this weird thing that the management of all of these different things is now the experience problem rather than the single thing that we're using.
It's a complexity, isn't it? I think back to what you were saying about the early days and all of the complex processes and steps you had to go through to eventually get to that email experience. And now we're seeing in the whole area of customer experience, the focus on simplicity, making things powerful through simple interactions and clean interfaces. That reminds me of when Apple first launched their App Store back in the day. There was no notion of native apps back then when the App Store launched, right? It was all web apps. That was how the whole App Store came into being. And then apps came along. You fast forward several years to where we are now in 2020, and we're starting to see a resurgence in the industry, in some sense reverting back to that more web-centric notion of how apps were when the App Store first launched. A really good example, I think, of that simplification is the Uber progressive web app. I've been using that, or had been using it before lockdown, and now obviously we're all using those modes of transport far less. But it's a really good example because it takes me back to that whole argument around simplicity. You don't need to download an app and wait for it. If you're in a country with a particularly underdeveloped cell phone network where you don't have the luxury of 4G or even 3G, having to download a multi-megabyte app to start off with is a challenge. But also, even if you are in a region of the world where you've got the luxury of 4G or 5G, Wi-Fi, etc., you still have the barriers of having to load an app store, go in, search, discover, whatever the process may be. So you've got all these blockers sitting in front of you, whereas with things like progressive web apps, you can just continue using the browser and just go to the URL, save that to your phone's background and just launch it like an app. I stopped using the Uber native app for quite a while now, and I just use a mobile website because it's just so immediate. It's just available. It's just there and it works. It does the job.
So what you're saying and what I'm hearing is that having it as an app in the App Store, it's added an extra layer of management, I suppose, if I'm harking back to what I was saying. The web, as long as it is in the tooth, is actually the better medium, really, for some of the services that you want to consume. You don't have that extra overhead.
Yeah, what you said there at the end is really important. For some of the services, not everything is absolutely perfect and well-tuned for the web or for a native app experience. It really depends on what you want to do and what the purpose of the experience you're creating is. Another recent experience, I got into cycling last year, was the cycling computer that I use. It's like a mini GPS device, and it helps me navigate from A to B to C when I'm cycling. When I first ordered the device and I attached it to my bike, I was like, okay, right, so got to download the app, right? There was no app. I went on to their website, and right there on the homepage, it said, design your route or follow your turn-by-turn directions. So I clicked on it. I was doing this all on my phone, obviously. As soon as I clicked on that link, the web app, it loaded up. And I was like, wow, it just works. I didn't have to download anything. It has an app-like interface. The map was smoothly scrolling around. I could do my navigation from point A to point B just by tapping and pointing, and the algorithm would work out the most efficient route. I could save it, could view my gallery. It was fantastic. I wish more products and services and experiences thought in that kind of way and really thought about why are they designing an app versus a website versus a progressive web app, whatever it might be. Figuring out the path of least resistance to help the customer, the user, get to what they need to be doing.
Why do you think companies don't go down that route? Is it because the App Store is so pervasive? Everybody knows about the App Store. That's the thing that gets advertised, that has the little logos on the websites and the posters available on the App Store or Google, the equivalent, the Play Store?
Yeah, I guess there's so many reasons, right? There's probably a certain amount of inertia. People have got used to the fact that there's an app store and therefore you have to have an app. If you don't have an app, then what does that say about your brand? Of course you need an app. Doesn't matter what the app does, you just need an app in there. Otherwise you're not present. People can't discover you. Or maybe they have a negative impression of your brand if you're not in the app store. I guess there's a lot of that going on.
Do you think, though, that the people do it also because there's that search element in the App Store?
Yeah, that is a really good point, because searching isn't anything new and it wasn't invented by the App Store. Searching has been around way before the App Stores existed, right?
It's discovery. I suppose we should call it discovery, right?
Yeah. I think that brings me to the topic of search engine optimization. The web has been providing searchability, discoverability, and the whole process of SEO is really mature on the web, right? To be able to enable users to discover content on the web is second nature. It's a well thought through process. When you think about it, whether it's organic search engine discovery or paid for, there's so many routes that we already have established that we can take to promote and make our products and services and experiences discoverable. And then you put this additional layer of the App Store on top of it, and you have to do App Store discovery, App Store content optimization, whereas you've already had it for years and years on the web. And so that goes back to that complexity that we were talking about earlier. It's just multiple layers of complexity, whereas in reality, we need to be simplifying things for the user so that they can engage with our products and services much more readily.
So just coming back to the PWAs, there's no install, they just work, right?
Yeah, essentially, with the exception of a few specific areas, a PWA is a URL you put into your browser. There's a few qualities of a progressive web app that we call a PWA that exists. So using a service called web workers and the ability to cache content locally and a number of other aspects of a PWA, you can effectively create a very efficient and slick experience. I think people get hung up about making PWAs app-like, whereas what they really should be focusing on is making the experience optimal and effective and usable and user-friendly for the end user. I cited the example of the Uber PWA earlier, but there are so many out there now that are coming out that have resulted in some really tangible improvements in customer engagement and usage. One that I use quite often when I'm traveling abroad to Asia, especially in India, is, I guess you could say, is the biggest marketplace provider in India is Flipkart. And Flipkart have a great PWA, which you don't need to download an app. And when you think of it from the context of Asian countries, India, for example, where the ubiquity of 3G, 4G, or even 5G coverage can be spotty when you're outside of built-up urban areas and cities, it makes so much sense. Even when you are in an area with good 5G coverage in one of the big metropolises, it again makes sense because it goes back to what we were talking about earlier around discoverability. If you can optimize the content of your PWA, which at the end of the day is a website, to be search engine friendly, to have the right phrases in there, to load really quickly, which is one of the important key aspects that Google places on surfacing your product or service on page one at the top, as well as user experience. It just makes sense. I remember using Flipkart whilst I was in a car. We happened to drop out of 3G and it dropped down to GPRS. I didn't even notice because I was tapping away on the website and I was navigating from section to section, scrolling through the product listing and then tapping on a particular product and the information page opening up. And then I looked at the top of my phone at the bar at the top and I was like, oh, we're in GPRS. Like, how's this still working? It's a website. But that's the nature of a PWA. It just works if designed properly. Flipkart's a great example. Another one, it's an example from India, is called housing.com. And they have an app, but they also have a PWA. And the PWA has shown so much traction because of the immediacy, just so much more discoverable through SEO, search engine optimization. It's really performant. It just works online, offline. At the end of the day, whether you're on an old smartphone that dates back 5 years or more, or a brand new iPhone or Android device, the performance of the website is amazing.
And that's the experience. That's the improvement to the experience.
It is.
Right there is you haven't had to go to the App Store.
Yeah. It's that simplification, it's the removal of barriers.
What about drawbacks? It can't all be sunshine and light.
I know. I think the drawbacks can be there are so many drawbacks, right? I think one of the key areas is around focus on user experience, figuring out the customer journey. People get hung up on the aesthetics so much and the user interface that they don't really focus on the process. Take a step back and think about how you're expecting to onboard or register with a service. How should that work? How should the signposting work? So if it's a multi-step registration process, are you keeping it secret from the user that they have to go through 16 steps before they get to the submit button at the end? Or are you showing them that they're in step 3 out of 10 and they've got another 7 or 8 steps to go? It's those little bits of detail that I think really result in bad experiences or good experiences. What do you reckon, Rich?
The number of times that I've been frustrated because the registration process, the onboarding piece, has been disconnected, disjointed, hard to follow, or worse still, you go through a couple of pages perhaps and filling out information and then you get told at the end that there's a problem, or maybe the error messages don't appear in the right place, or they're confusing. All of those things make you tear your hair out. I think some of the frustrating ones is parking. You go to park your car, you get to the car park, you've got every single parking app that you know to man is on your phone, and you get to the sign, and funnily enough, it's one that you've not got on your phone. It's the only one, perhaps. So you then download that. And then, of course, that doesn't work straight off the bat because you're not registered. So then you have to go through a registration process. And because it's an app, which is great, but the registration process, they kick you out into the web.
And by that time, 20 minutes passed and the traffic warden's come around and given you a ticket already.
It drives you insane. And not only parking, I'm thinking another one, because luckily, I'm very lucky to have an EV car. Have I ever managed to charge it at a charging station? No, because every time I go to a charging station, it's a different app because it's a different service provider. And then they've got a dodgy onboarding thing. And then you go through that. And by the time that you've done that, you plug it in and you find out that it doesn't work anyway. It's just, it's mind-bogglingly bad. By the way, I'm emphasizing a little bit here because not everything is this bad. There are some good experiences out there, but that's the kind of experience that's going to set a tone for that brand.
Absolutely. And I think the example you gave of error messages is a classic one. We were just looking at a particular brand's website and onboarding experience a couple of weeks ago here at Coheasus, and we noticed that in going through the registration process, you filled out the form. If you didn't get the format of your email right, or you left one of the other fields blank, it gave you an error message. But those error messages were below the fields, as in not below the individual fields, but just at the bottom of the page after the fields. You just didn't notice that they were there unless you were specifically looking for them. You wouldn't know that the messages were there. And then when you did notice them, they had no context to where you were supposed to then scroll back up to and correct the mistake. Where do I go? What do I look at? That was just a classic example of a complete screw up of the user experience.
Now being CEO, I tend not to get involved in the day-to-day so much, but when I was there as a tech director and working with the teams, I found this great image of a developer had basically built a form, and on that form there was a date of birth entry field. What the developer had done, my mind still boggles to this day, is that they created a drop-down for each digit of the date of birth. You had to go in, so say you're born on the 1st of January, you have to open the drop-down, scroll down to the bottom to 0, open the next drop-down, scroll down to 1, go to the next drop-down, scroll down to 0, scroll the next drop-down, scroll down to 1, open the first digit of the year, which happened to be 4 digits. This is kind of mind-bogglingly crazy. Does it pass a QA question? Can you enter your date of birth? Does the date of birth go in? Does it work? Yes, it does. But it's just a terrible experience.
Yeah, I think managing the user's expectation is half of the problem, right? So another classic example would be login patterns. There's many different login patterns out there, right? You could just put in your username and password, you get an error back, or when you're registering for a new account, you could be sent off to check your email because a magic link is sent to your email and you just click on that link and hey presto, you're logged in. There are more and more websites and apps as well using this magic link way of logging in. The theory is it's easier to implement that than remember 5,000 different passwords. But do a lot of these services manage the user's expectation before totally flipping on its head and changing a normal pattern of activity? Today, most people's notion of a normal pattern of activity for registering for a service or for logging in would be you put in your username and password. But then you come across these websites that have updated the way they do that, and it just has login, put your username in. You're thinking, okay, so where's the password field? They don't tell you that they're about to change the way you're logging in. They don't signpost it. They don't manage your expectations. And you hit submit out of frustration, and it says, now go and check your email. And you're like, well, why are they doing that? Right? They could have told me that in advance to set my expectations before I started to worry or fuss and fret.
Yeah, it's around that messaging bit. I tend to read everything on the screen, but I know quite a few people, we're all different in the world. And there are some people who don't tend to like reading all the messages on the screen. And they get frustrated by stuff that I don't get frustrated so much by, but they get frustrated by the fact that the message comes up, they don't see it because it's still in the text. And this applies to accessibility as well. And how do you make that really clear to people who perhaps have limited vision? We're not sitting here, well, I'm certainly not sitting here as the expert in experience. We've got some amazing people in the team who do that. But I can definitely speak from my experience of the user and how user-friendly, going back to my original term, this experience is in today's world. There is a big opportunity for companies to make things far better. And the reason that they're going to want to do that is basically there's experience inflation. So everyone's experience in some of the bigger services, the ones that have got lots and lots of money behind them, their experience of those services is increasing. And they're going to expect it out of the smaller players in the market. The second bit is it makes commercial sense, because if you reduce friction from someone using your app or your service, it will increase the conversions. It will increase the amount of money that you make. If you remove the friction from your support services, then you can reduce your costs. So it makes commercial sense, absolutely makes commercial sense. And I think those are the two big drivers. The accelerator to this is obviously the wonderful situation the world's found itself in 2020 has really started to accelerate that. I think more people are looking at that and saying to themselves, in my business, actually, what could I do to get ahead, considering that there's not as much free lunch anymore? It's more competitive now because everyone's stepping up their game because they're a bit more hungry because of the situation that's happened. So I think there's drivers in the market to really continue this press with experience. But as I said, there's some watch outs. The easier things get, the more things you tend to put into your life.
Yeah, totally. No show could be complete in 2020 without the mention of the dreaded COVID. But you're absolutely right. And I think focus on driving commercial success is so much more important now that we're all working from home. We're getting our courier services coming to our doorsteps 5 times a day, 7 days a week in some cases, delivering all of this stuff. But one of the challenges I found way before the situation the world is in now for many years is the user experience of viewing products online. I think retail is a classic example of that, whether it's clothes or kitchenware or sports equipment, whatever it might be. When you don't walk into the store and you don't have that visceral sense of the touch, feel, smell of the product, it's really difficult to give the user a decent sense of what they're buying, right? How can you really tell the color of that garment? How can you tell the texture, the smoothness, roughness, whatever it might be? A really good example of one brand that I came across very recently was a luxury cookware brand called Le Creuset. Some people may already have a shiny, glossy Le Creuset pot on their kitchen table. And with such a premium high-end product, it's so important to be able to show that product in all of its glory, not just in a grid on the screen where you click on it and you get a bit of information on the side with a marginally slightly larger image, which you could then click on and then you get a marginally slightly larger image still. With Le Creuset and how they've recently relaunched their UK website, it's a feast on the eyes. You can see their products in all their glory in full screen, full bleed, getting rid of the noise so you can actually appreciate the luxury quality of the product. And if I'm going to be paying a premium price for a product like that. That's what I want to see. I want to be able to almost reach out to the screen and pick up that object and feel it, its weight, its aesthetic, the gloss on the pot or the pan reflects the light in my kitchen, whatever it might be. And I think Le Creuset really nicely achieves that with the recently relaunched UK website. And I wish more retailers would embrace that. I think we need to go beyond the thumbnails and the 30-second catwalk videos for clothes and really try and figure out a new way of helping customers decide what they're going to buy. Otherwise, we'll just continue to go down that road of ordering 3 different jackets and then returning 2 of them. That does no good to inventory control. It does no good to the impact on the environment and sustainability and many other factors. At the end of the day, it doesn't make commercial sense unless you really help the user understand what they're trying to buy from you.
Yeah, the simplest thing is someone orders something, they get it, and they keep it. Any return's going to complicate things. I've had a couple of really interesting, good experiences recently. One of them is that I'm now sporting a pair of reading glasses. This is very exciting times for me. I've been resisting glasses for a very, very long time. These are only +1s. That's my claim to fame at the minute. Without revealing my age, I'm beating the curve right now. So that's good. Point is that I wanted to buy some online. I can't remember the store name. I should really remember it. And I'm sure they're not the only ones now, but you can just try them on. There's a PWA. It asks to use your camera on your phone. You say yes, and then bang, you've got a pair of the glasses on your face and you can change the model. I'm sure many people have done this. For me, that's all I really needed. I know some people actually want to pick them off and see the texture and stuff like that, but that experience for me was enough to push me over the edge to purchase. Now, if that site had just sat on an image, someone had taken a photograph of them, that probably wouldn't have pushed me over the edge. It's that how deep can you get the engagement to go? The deeper you can get the engagement to go with the person who's using the system, the platform, whatever, then the more meaningful it is for them, then the more likely they are to take action. That's not just about retail. That's about support. That's about information learning. My kids being homeschooled for months and months and months, some of the tools that they had on their laptops were actually quite engaging. And the more engagement you get, the deeper learning you're going to get.
I think you're right. Engagement goes to so many different levels. I'm a big fan of fintech services, banking with a fintech, mortgaging with a fintech, many other examples. What I think the fintech sector, by and large, get right is that quality of customer service and the way they deliver it. A really good example is take Starling or Monzo, Revolut, any of the big fintechs today. You can firstly, branch networks have been disappearing for years on the high street from the traditional banks. Secondly, when it's raining outside, which it often does here in the UK, who wants to schlep down the road to queue up in a branch waiting for 20 minutes to speak to somebody? Why can't I just pick up my phone and not only phone my bank, which often ends up with you being in a queue, why can't I just instant message them? And this is the thing that a lot of the fintechs get. They allow you to have that interaction. And it's not just a chat bot that you're talking to. It's a real human being. It's a customer service person who's answering your queries in an interactive, real-time, instant messaging style, as if you're using Facebook Messenger or whatever your favorite messaging platform is. That to me is golden. It's magical. And that's the kind of experience that I would expect. When you look at the retail floor, for example, there have been a lot of gimmicks, things like the magic mirror experience, where you can stand in front of a mirror and you can see a virtual representation of the garment you want to wear on you without having to take your clothes off and put it on, or the smart changing cubicle, where you can flick through the product catalog on the wall of the cubicle and then ask somebody on the floor to come and bring it to you, so you don't need to slip your shoes back on, your trousers back on to go out and then get that one size up and then come back to discover your cubicle's gone because somebody else is in it. You got to stand waiting there for another 5 minutes. But all of this technology, all of these things really don't matter unless the business process is stitched up with the technology. I think the early days of these experimental changing booths and magic mirrors fell over because the people on the floor, the staff, weren't trained to be attentive to the needs of the people in those experiences. If I was in that cubicle and I've just I've tried on that shirt and it's too tight, and I want to get a larger one without having to step out and redress and everything, and I hit that button to call somebody, nobody turns up. I keep on pushing the button, nobody turns up. That kind of cancels the whole point of the technology.
The experience has to be matched up for the business. The business has to be in tune with it. There are certain, we call them R&D adventures that do push things forward, but generally don't end up panning out because the business isn't aligned with it or for whatever reason. They're good that they happen. I wouldn't want them to stop happening. But you're right, if the business wants to really drive and be successful, they need to make sure that everything's lined up together, because otherwise it doesn't work out. We've seen that with clients a number of times. It's the clients that are the ones that are lined up. And if they don't have a strategy written down, they've got a strategy in their head and they're all aligned on that. And that's where our difference really works.
That brings us nicely to wrap up this conversation, Rich. There's some really, really interesting things we've gone through today. If there was one take-home message that I'd love to leave with our listeners from everything we've been talking about, is to really focus on the reason behind what you're doing, whether it's a website or an app, and feed that directly back into the commercial KPIs that you're trying to achieve. And if you can bring those two things together and bring in the right experts, such as the wonderful engineers and experienced designers from Coheasus, I think you're heading in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much, Rich. Catch up soon.
Thanks, Kaustav.